And we said, if we can actually take that physics and create some chemistry out of it, there'll be immense value. And that's what AWS did. That's what the iPhone did.
Now let's look at DevRev, right? Because you started as a Jira alternative, then pivoted to
Actually, we didn't do a Jira alternative. I mean, I'll tell you why that is factually wrong. But I think what I'll say is that for us, work, whether it's support work or developer work, it actually just work. In fact, all these companies were created as silos.
How do you make that funding runway last longer than usual?
Yeah, I mean, stretching the dollar is a term that I use a lot. And also the word superlinear. Like, what does it mean to not create a linear company but a superlinear company? If a hedge fund in China can do so, I'm definitely, absolutely sure somebody in India can do that as well.
Silicon Valley has been home to many of India's best and brightest. Leading innovation has taken them on different paths, but one founder is carving a niche by building solutions to bring down barriers between product developers and consumers. After all, if the customer comes first, the customer will last. Hello and welcome to Crafting Bharat Mission 2047. Our goal to bring to you the most interesting startup stories that are powering the world of business in India and around the world. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and joining me today is a founder with a storied career in leading startups, but he still considers himself a student of business. He now helms an AI unicorn whose mission is to help build the Earth's most customer-centric companies. Please welcome Dheeraj Pandey, the founder of DevRev. Dheeraj, great to have you on board.
Great to be here too.
Looking forward to a great conversation. But what does it take to build a billion-dollar business helping customers acquire and retain, well, more customers? Let's find out the origin story of DevRev in our first segment called Ignite. All right, Dheeraj, you've had, as I mentioned, a storied career, and you've had a knack for finding killer use cases, because when I look at what you did in Nutanix, something around data is what we thought you're doing, and well, you pioneered hyperconverged infrastructure with complete cluster. Let's look at what you did with DevRev, because the organization, the enterprise is vast, so many departments, everyone wants to be customer-centric, but the lines between engineering team, developers, marketers, and everything, it's so blurred, you're not getting the right fit. But what surprises me in 2020 that this problem would still exist. So, take us through the earliest adventures that you and Manoj went through in trying to get this product market fit and convincing customers that customer support can be a revenue function and not a cost function.
Yeah, first of all, great to be here, Gautam. There's always immense value creation when you bring things together. And the largest technology shifts have happened when you've brought things together. Like, you go back to the internet, we brought people together or machines together through networking. iPhone was about bringing a lot of gadgets together. AWS was about bringing a lot of infrastructure together, because otherwise people had to piecemeal go and stitch a lot of things. So AI's biggest sort of value will be two things. Ease of use, which is how do you do things conversationally and talk to machines conversationally. And the second will be bringing things together. And that means your customers, your products, your people, your work, your users, your documents, all this stuff needs to come together in one place. And then you can actually go and open this up for search and analytics and automations and things like that. So we saw this as a big sort of Nutanix 2.0 in some sense. And Nutanix was about that. Hyperconvergence, as you said, was about converging things, because in the data center, there was a Cisco and a NetApp and an EMC and a VMware and an HP and a Dell and so on and so forth. And we said, look, if we left shifted a lot of this complexity, then we have actually created value.
All right.
Because in the 20 years before that, there was a lot of things that were actually elements, like servers and storage and virtualization and networks and security firewalls and things like that. And we said, if we can actually take that physics and create some chemistry out of it, there'll be immense value. And that's what AWS did. That's what the iPhone did. That's what the internet did. We had lots of machines in the 10 years before that with Apple computers and Microsoft Windows computers and so on, but they were not networked together.
So to change the biology of an enterprise, you decided to introduce a bit of chemistry.
Yeah, I mean, not even because biology will exist when we start to do things in a highly generative way. So that time will come too. But most of the enterprise was physical. We had a lot of physics. Every department had tools and software that only knew how to do work in that department. So customer support and, incident management or cloud operations and engineering operations, they all have their silos.
So that was the issue. Physics introduces inertia, and there's inertia in the organization when it comes to customers.
And nobody knows, why am I doing this work? On behalf of which customer and for which product. So the back
Even digitally native business?
I mean, digital natives probably did this a little better, but even for them, the complexity is in millions or tens of millions of users. And then you don't have either low latency or precise customer support or hyper-personalized messages or customer support. So for these very large businesses, digital native businesses, they have the problem of 10 million, 100 million users. And for others who are not, or maybe in a B2B world, they just have many of these front office departments that don't understand anything about products, or back office departments that don't understand anything about customers.
Any interesting pitch meetings where the problem was so clear, it was a win from the get-go for you and DevRev?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're building a platform. And it's never easy to sell a platform. So you need a use case to start with, And in the first couple of years, we basically just put our heads down and says, what's the hardest part about this platform? Data. Said, if you don't bring all the data together, and we call it the DevRev airdrop as a metaphor, but also as a feature name. Airdrop, just like two phones airdrop contacts to each other. We airdropped a lot of legacy data into DevRev. But you can't sell this because data at the end of the day is a means to an end. Even putting search and analytics and workflows, these are engines. Search engine is not something you can sell like that alone. So we had to go and say, let's make this highly conversational for a customer support use case. And even within that, let's start with self-serve customer experience, and then we'll get to the customer support team and then the product management and so on. So when we went out there, for example, talking to one of the largest banks in India, they said, look, we do have 1 billion sessions of users coming in every quarter, and we need to figure out what are they doing. And when are they crashing? And when are they complaining? And when are they rage clicking? And when are they actually dropping out of funnels and checkout funnels and things like that? Now, this is a big data problem and something that is highly possible for machines to take care of. You can't have product managers or support people sift through 1 billion sessions to do something. So what we have done in a very economized way to track 1 billion of these sessions for HDFC and ICICI and Bajaj Finserv and others has been transformational. And we're barely scratching the surface because all we have done is gathered 1 billion sessions for, let's say, HDFC every quarter. But now how do you go and analyze it? And not just report and dashboard on it, but now do real-time use cases like fraud on top of it. I think that's where you unleash the power of NVIDIA and GPUs to really go.
Fantastic. You've given me the perfect segue for my next question because, as you said, you've just scratched the surface. But when I again look at your history, when you were at Nutanix, I believe in a Reddit AMA, you said a few years ago that you took product risks at Nutanix, but not business model risks. Now, let's look at DevRev, right? Because you started as a Jira alternative, then pivoted to
Actually, we didn't do a Jira alternative. I mean, I'll tell you why that is factually wrong, but I think what I'll say is that for us, work, whether it's support work or developer work, they're actually just work. In fact, all these companies were created as silos, but 90% of the engineering that they do is exactly the same. So whether it's Salesforce opportunities or Salesforce tickets or Zendesk tickets or Freshdesk tickets, or Jira issues, they are all work, and they
Okay.
have stages and they have states and approvals. And so it's just magical that if you were to build software today
Hmm.
and start on doing what's an opportunity, what's a ticket, what's an issue, what's an incident, 90% of what you need to achieve is exactly the same.
But the question is, from this product risk and business model risk perspective, did your thought as a leader evolve? Because I mentioned that at that Jira alternative, because it seems like you pivoted to customer centricity and customer support. In a sense, you went whole hog. You've clarified that by saying all work is work. We just looked at the key killer use case of being focused on the customer. But as a founder, has your perception, has your reading of risk evolved from where you were in Nutanix to where you are at DevRev? And how does that sort of, how do you look at issues differently now from a risk perspective?
Yeah, I mean, look, we were basically going after practitioners at Nutanix who were IT practitioners. And now our users are, white collared professionals who actually sit in desks and are making business decisions. So Nutanix, we were actually a little bit more towards machines and infrastructure. Here we're more towards humans and business process. So that's the big difference. Now, what's the business risk versus the product risk? At Nutanix, we're taking a technology risk. That, look, we got to get rid of some of these, infrastructure players, and we have a new form factor which runs on commodity servers, which is straight out of Taiwan, and then we put pure software on top of it and do a lot of data center work through pure software. Here, I think the big business risk is that can we actually look at a really productive, efficient, creative enterprise where they don't have to use as many humans in the loop? Now, that's a controversial topic. What does it mean to actually look at a layer of software that mimics a human being or does as much as a human being? I think this is a timeless journey. For the next 50 years, maybe we'll keep talking about, can AI really mimic, as a machine, can really mimic a human or not?
Well, we'll see where we head. But before we wrap up the first segment, a question on funding, because you raised the largest seed fund round in Silicon Valley. No small feat. Of course, you're no stranger to feats because you've taken your previous company to IPO. But the question which a lot of the startup founders are watching this show, they usually face is, how do you make that funding runway last longer than usual? Because burnout is the first issue that they face, a high rate of burn. So maybe some lessons that you learned from your Nutanix experience, which you kind of used in DevRev when it comes to that funding aspect, making the dollar stretch more.
Yeah, I mean, stretching the dollar is a term that I use a lot. And also the word superlinear, like what does it mean to not create a linear company, but a superlinear company? So let's start with talent first. I think you're really looking for superlinear talent as well, because initially if you just start with lots of specialists, which you could create a lot of VPs early on who are specialists in themselves, and then they start fighting with each other and they burn a lot of your dollars. I mean, I was in a company 25 years ago, which was funded by Vinod Khosla when he was still at Kleiner Perkins. And we just were so top heavy as a company, and founders, they struggle to let go. And obviously there's a balance there, like you do need to let go, but you also don't need to make it too top heavy.
That's part of evolution.
Yeah, and that's the place where the baton falls. You try to pass the baton and the other party is not ready to run at your speed right now, and you need to slow down and they need to pick up. So a lot of synchronization that needs to happen. That's where a lot of startups burn a lot of dollars. Secondly, young talent, interns, being able to go to colleges early on. There's a lot of hunger out there, I mean, somebody was saying that the West has lost the hunger, but the East needs problem statements, like hard problems, because the customers are all mostly in the West, or at least the high paying ones. So I think how you arbitrage this hunger with actually that other hunger, which is demand and supply coming together, is at the core of building great companies that stretch the dollar.
This is like listening to the Dhoni of the startup world. Always have hunger in you and know when to pass the baton so that you can then move on to bigger things. All right, on that note, it's time for our next segment. Let's understand how DevRev scaled to new heights in its drive to create a new startup operating system on our next segment titled Launch. All right, Dheeraj, I read that you're a strong advocate for what you call high pricing. So you have a high list price, but you have a high discount as well, so that the customer feels that they're getting a premium experience from a value perspective. Now, how well has that strategy served DevRev in as it expands its customer base, I believe, to over 1,000 customers right now? Give us your insight on why that pricing strategy works for our startup founders here.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're selling to the large enterprise, you also need to realize that everything is driven by incentives. I mean, all human behavior can be mapped to incentives. Now, procurement in large enterprise, is incentivized, for discounts. Their bonuses depend on discounts. Now, it's antithetical to your startup customer or your mid-market customer. So we've actually done a pricing that actually serves both ends. There's consumption pricing, things that, startups don't want to pay upfront for many things that they don't know what they're going to use it on. So we have consumption pricing and then we have subscription pricing. And both of these are actually sitting next to each other depending on whether they're serving a small customer or a very large customer. High to me is about not being defensive or apologetic about your value creation. I think everybody wants to own a Mercedes, right? Whether or not they get there is another thing, but everybody wants that. So when you go out there and think about pricing, a lot of it's tied to value creation. The biggest negotiating leverage you have with the market is the kind of value you create for the market. And of course, you have to accept all currencies, you have to accept credit cards, you have to accept invoices and purchase orders and channel payments and things of that nature. So we've really catered to the entire spectrum where we look at very large enterprises and the way we need to price for them, but also catered to small startup as well. And now with the world of AI, a lot of the consumption-based pricing is going to stick because people are like, well, I'm going to pay you for outcomes, because if you want to say that a software is about or a machine is about to mimic a human, then why should I pay you for subscription? So I think pricing is evolving dramatically because of AI now. And we have a platform pricing, which is based on consumption, and then app pricing, which is based on subscription.
And it's also great that this conversation is more and more towards an outcome focus. While we were in the hype stage earlier, it's more now as to what does this do for our company? How can we serve our customers better? In that context, my next question to you is about making AI actionable, because you have mentioned in an interview that AI does not run in a vacuum by stitching a bunch of workflows and calling it done. So my question to you is, how is DevRev democratizing data at scale and breaking organizational silos even in digitally native businesses to make AI actionable? Can you give us specific USPs of how DevRev is different from its competitors?
Well, I'll give you start with a metaphor, analogy maybe. How was a smartphone assembled? If you think about it, first of all, you have to miniaturize the camera, miniaturize the speaker, miniaturize the music player, miniaturize apps. At some level, if you open up an iPhone, it's a pretty complex and a highly engineered system. The oscilloscope, the accelerometer, the camera, all compass, everything is actually miniaturized and kept together like that, right? And of course, then there's the app store, and then you have the Wi-Fi, the radio, all these things are actually there as well. So when you think about where business software is headed, we're headed towards miniaturization, because that's the only way you can disrupt an existing market. Salesforce is too heavyweight, I mean, ServiceNow is very heavyweight. We can't fight on their turf by trying to be like them, like cheaper, faster. That never works. You have to figure out a way to miniaturize all this stuff. So the way to miniaturize this is to say, look, we'll be the best on mobile apps. Our experience is conversational and it runs on a mobile app. AI is in your pocket. Or on your desktop, there's a simple keyboard shortcut like a command dot or something, and it opens up a space bar, and that space bar is like a search bar that Google gave you on a browser 20 years ago. Now it's available on a desktop surface itself. But the back end of it is where the complexity and the highly engineered system, the data itself, will actually have to show. And we have to be really good at assembling all the data, sales data, conversational data, engineering data, support data, cloud data, all this data needs to come together. And once they're linked well, now machines can reason. Like imagine if I were to say, summarize a B2B account, one of my customers. Like how do I summarize if it's not connected to its opportunities, to its tickets, to its enhancements, to the
It's a
developers?
neuron network, right? Just like our brain
Exactly.
operates.
I mean, we call it a knowledge graph.
Knowledge
There's an
graph.
enterprise knowledge graph. And if we don't give this highly interconnected system to a machine, it cannot reason the temperature of an account or the impact of an employee or the happiness of a customer. I mean, all these things are about being able to go reason on a web of knowledge that's connected with each other. And that is exactly why I say that it's like a highly engineered system, no different than when you open up the cover of an iPhone and you'll find all these things.
All right. Let's assume you're in a marketing meeting and your marketing team says, Dheeraj, the customer comes first, the customer will last. What's the headline, one line you would say to them in response to that? As to how bringing together all the points that you've mentioned in one line, if the statement to you is the customer comes first, the customer will last, what would you say?
My thinking and our thinking is involved to thinking about team intelligence. Like, what does AI really unleash?
All right.
It's team.
One line.
Yeah.
No explanation. A headline.
Yeah. Team intelligence is where a customer is in your team and the AI agent is also in your team. I think this is the way we are actually democratizing how AI agents will not take away your jobs and how the customer is not them, it's us.
All right, time to engage a boost to understand how AWS powers startups to new heights. All right, Dheeraj, I think DevRev has been an AWS customer since day one and is now a partner. Your entire product, in fact, is built on AWS. Now, let's look at the benefits. It's afforded you, given you an affordable, lean and accurate vector search, solving the issue of Gen AI use cases being bottlenecked by LLM calls. Broadly, AWS Bedrock is helping you build Gen AI applications. So how do you see the bond between DevRev and AWS transforming the enterprise, presenting more value to the ecosystem? Because as you mentioned, this is an era of outcomes. What does this do to change a whole lot of things? What would you say about this partnership?
I've always been a big fan of not just AWS, but Amazon as well. I'm a big customer of Amazon. And I go back 20 years, even before AWS. And the reason why Amazon, the retailer, became so popular and was obviously customer centric is because they had three pillars, convenience, choice, and pricing. And I feel like these are the exact same three pillars that I look at AWS for. There's convenience, there's choice, and then there's pricing as well. These three things AWS is very, very good at. But also in the B2B sense, they've put in the best technologists for bridging the divide between requirements and technology. They have by far the best sales engineers, solution architects who actually come and translate technology into what reality is. And having our developers talk to their developers in a very low latency, highly precise way has been unique. And I mean, it's a cliche to say it's day one, but I think that AWS still thinks it's day one. They're very humble at what they do. They act like a startup. And I think the level of hustle is just unparalleled.
Fantastic. Well, we have reached the last stage of our conversation here on Crafting Bharat Mission 2047. It's time now to get a bird's eye view from our guest on the India opportunity for our final segment called Orbit. All right, Dheeraj, considering the narrative of startups that I look at, it's shifted from pure growth to profitability, and the efforts are now centered more towards retention rather than just purely going after acquisition numbers. Now, DevRev recently signed up with Quality Kiosk in India. What's your outlook on the growing DevRev's presence in the Indian market in the context of increasing focus on CX, increasing focus on retention? You mentioned you've spoken to big banks. What other sectors are you actively exploring here in India to grow DevRev?
Yeah. I mean, look, the thesis is that it should grow to a $10 trillion economy in the next 10 years. And if you grow with it, nothing like it. Because right now, UK is stinking. Germany is in tatters. Japan has slowed down. And if you add all these three countries together, that was 20% of, let's say, Cisco's revenue. I need to make up for that. And India will help me make up for that, provided I'm natively built for the Indian market. What does that mean? What we did for PLG, which is product-led growth thinking for startups and freemium and so on, is exactly the same architecture that will lend itself well for India, which means that 100 million users, like you have to price it differently for 100 million users, as opposed to 500,000 users in a B2B world out there, because, in the US, you can say I'll price it differently, like with 500,000 users, but how do you price it for 100 million users of HDFC or ICICI or Access or whatever? So we've done a fairly good job of pricing because we were built for startups as well, and we brought that PLG mindset to 100 million strong customer for for their users. Now, India also has not just scale of consumers but also employee churn. So you need to really think hard about developer experience and employee experience as a core competitive advantage for a company, because it's still a land of opportunities, and Bangalore and Mumbai and Chennai, people switch jobs because they're also young people, and there's a high concentration of jobs, especially white collar jobs in the big cities. So we said, look, if we have to really cater to India as a market, we can't just say AI is an afterthought. We say, well, because of AI, you can take care of a 100 million strong customer base. And also, you provide a better employee experience for knowledge discovery and enterprise search and, conversational onboarding and things like that, that it reduces employee churn as well.
Absolutely. And that's what we should be looking for enterprises, because employees are the stores of value, right? The longer you have, the more you can leverage the benefits.
Yeah.
Two key themes that you've given me on which I'll base my next two questions. One is the entire SaaS universe, because there's a post on the DevRev blog which states that the current SaaS model, which propelled India into, say, the global software limelight, has kind of reached its limits. So how can India overcome these challenges and leapfrog to, say, SaaS 2.0 and become a global AI powerhouse with those Mission 2047 objectives? As you said, 10 years, 10 trillion, hopefully we reach, but there's still a lot of roadblocks to overcome. So SaaS 2.0, what does India need to do?
I think one is get the talent to, really move beyond prompt engineering. In AI, there's a crawl, walk, run. Crawl is, hey, I can use prompt engineering and use foundation models, the large foundation models for, modern workflows. But you've got to move beyond that, because that's what Silicon Valley calls GPT wrappers. There'll be a dime a dozen. There'll be lots and lots of commodity companies out there trying to say that they could do X, Y, and Z. I think going from there to real semantic search, which is, and how do you unlock a lot of enterprise search? But finally, a few companies have to get into reasoning. Reasoning is actually the next wave of what AI needs to look like.
Can we expect a deep seek from India?
One has to. And I think folks coming out of really good engineering colleges can do that. If a hedge fund in China can do so, I'm definitely, absolutely sure somebody in India can do that as well. And last but not the least, there's a bunch of designers, really good design ethos in this country as well, because of B2C companies. And we have consumer companies that have, like, look at Zomato's overall persona is very consumer grade and design centric. We need to really unleash that on AI, because AI without design is actually unusable.
Absolutely. And that's a clarion call to all of our startup founders watching this show. Come up with your unique take on search reasoning. Maybe we see the next level of, say, AI being unlocked here in India, the better version of DeepSeek. Before we let you go, Dheeraj, product-led growth that you mentioned, I want to ask you a question on that, because you mentioned in a LinkedIn post that one of the hardest things to get right in any company is product and product management. It gets confused with program and project management. So in that context, we have a lot of startup founders who view this show. What advice would you give to startups in India about product-led growth strategy, especially as the latency between makers and consumers is reducing?
See, I think as engineers, we have a mindset of ho jayega. We can do this stuff. It's easy. Building features is easy. But going and actually teaching the market of when to use what, And how do you really practice less is more is the hard part. I think India is still about more is less because we come from a service mindset where we want to actually make our customers happy. The service mindset is about, I can do more for you. I don't think I've done enough for you. And this creeps into product as well. It becomes an ensemble of features. So, really being able to bring the Steve Jobs out in each one of these founders, who are also product managers by definition, is, I think, the hardest thing. I'm a big fan of Greg McKeown. Greg McKeown is a Stanford professor and has written a couple of related books. One is called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. It's the hardest thing in India, disciplined pursuit of less. And then his other book is called Effortless, which is really about making a lot of these things effortless. Easier said than done, but if you believe that the problem is we are actually being reactive to our customers' feature sets and really start thinking about whatever little you do, if you promised that and did a very good job of it, trust will build, the initial minimal viable product will get delivered, because at the end of the day, the buyer on the other side is basically saying, I'm willing to give them a chance if they did what they said and if they said what they did. That's the core of an MVP.
Well, ye dil mange more. Unfortunately, we have run out of time in this conversation. It is time to conclude this fascinating talk around the nuts and bolts of running a startup, that is raising the customer quotient for a wide variety of companies as the world moves from digital transformation to AI transformation. Dheeraj, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is mine, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Till next time, this is your host, Gautam Srinivasan, signing off.